hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Hybrid Podcast. I am Sean Collins, and this is where cannabis policy meets pop culture. So I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Erik Gunderson, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different. This is an emergency conversation. I guess it's because we didn't plan it, so that's what makes the emergency, but we also can't ignore it. So if you haven't been following very closely, and no one would besmirch you for not doing that, but this weekend, as the government shutdown was coming to a long, drawn-out close, and it's still not closed, but in the scramble to try to reopen the federal government, the Senate quietly tucked a major policy change into their shutdown package. There's a few paragraphs that could completely redefine hemp across the country and effectively ban intoxicating products. I'll say overnight, but maybe in a calendar year. We will ultimately see. It's one of those Washington maneuvers that's kind of easy to miss if you're not looking for it, but if you work in this space, and plenty of you do, hemp, cannabis, manufacturing, retail, it's the kind of move that could change everything. The irony here, too, by the way, is hard to miss. Mitch McConnell, the same guy who wrote the hemp legalization into the Farm Bill in 2018, is now leading the effort to push what he calls loopholes closed. Rand Paul, his fellow Kentuckian, is fighting to keep those farmers and small businesses alive. It's a split-screen moment. Kentucky versus Kentucky, control versus liberty, both sides claiming to protect the same industry. And while all this plays out, by the way, the House is still stalled. The government is not open, and the 2024 elections is already shaping how people talk about things like drugs and public policy and public safety. This isn't a culture war headline, though. It's a policy shift that could pull hemp beverages and edibles off of their liquor store shelves from coast to coast. So, to help us unpack what's happening, we are really excited to be joined again by Pamela Epstein, the Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer at Terpene Belt, and still one of the sharpest, most experienced voices in all of cannabis and hemp law. She's been tracking this, of course, hour by hour, like most of us, except for Erik, maybe. And she's here to help us understand what's real, what's rumor, and hopefully what comes next. So, before we dig into those details, Erik, you've lived through last-minute policymaking and 11th-hour negotiations, high stakes, all of that sort of made-for-TV stuff. When you see a sweeping change like this buried in let's call it a must-pass bill, right? It's open the government or don't. What goes through your mind? What do you think? And also, emergency podcast. Look at us.
Emergency podcast. No, it actually, leading up to this conversation, that's what it brought me back to, was my time in the speaker's office and some tough budget negotiations and what that looked like, and the winners and losers that were really decided, not necessarily behind closed doors, but in smaller groups in the full legislature, or a typical committee process. And we were talking a little bit before this, we hit record on this, but like, the part of me feels bad, but look, hemp is in a bad spot right now. They're between getting what they were hoping for and opening the U.S. government, which it just feels like it's inevitable that they're going to be faced with this reality in, 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is, before they have this 12-month window to figure out a new approach, because they certainly need a new approach, because it seems like what they're going to be left with is by their own making. So I'm glad we have Pam here that can fill us in. There's so much that we can talk about, because this is such a monumental moment for this industry. What are states going to do? Their states have these programs. Who's going to end up being the voice for the hemp folks? We were talking, what are the options that they're going to have on their whiteboard for next steps? Like, something's going to need to happen, or something I'm certain will happen. There will be efforts. What does that look like? So we got our insider here, Pam. Hopefully we can bring some clarity, or at least kind of start understanding what the next 12 months can look like, because there are so many different stakeholder groups that are going to be impacted by this, not just hemp industry, although I mean, it certainly can be scary for a business owner in this position. So excited for the
Yeah,
conversation.
I think it's important to level set who is going to be the most deeply impacted. It is the hemp cannabinoid and specifically intoxicating hemp that falls under the Farm Bill. Because who is going to benefit? Because I think it's always important to understand why this is happening is those that were doing industrial hemp, seed stock, fiber,
Hmm.
non-cannabinoid products have been overly burdened and unfairly treated. There is a difficult environment in which to get money. USDA is very wary of, are you actually producing cannabinoid products? Like, what is going on? As a business that is focused on non-cannabinoid production, I will tell you we are overregulated. We actually are still a regulatory orphan, as I like to put it in this particular package, because we're just hemp. So the focus of this, the redefining of hemp, is to provide that clarity between truly industrial hemp, non-cannabinoid things that go a different direction, including things like hemp seed oil and hemp parts that have gone through the generally recognized as safe process in order to put those products into market. And then there was this separating out and really zeroing in on how to treat hemp cannabinoid products. And Erik and Shawn, you both said this is a mess of sort of some people's own making and industry's own making. It's the failure to both recognize, acknowledge, and start to engage Congress that cannabinoid hemp products need to be treated differently. They are not just hemp products. They are not wellness products. They are products that contain cannabinoids. And so that is the reckoning that happened. How do we take that ball, which was treated very restrictively, and move that forward? And I think that's really sort of one of the things that it is a level setting exercise, is that
Mm,
not everybody will suffer. I think that that Chicken Little, the sky is falling, the entire hemp industry is going to go away. That is incorrect. And it's also, nomenclature is really important, and we're really sensitive as cannabinoid advocates. A ban means zero. One of the realities of what happened here is that Rand Paul said we can't have nothing, right? You can't have zero. I understand zero point 0.4 milligrams per container seems like nothing, but it in fact is not zero. So one of the biggest takeaways here is understand what you are asking for and the words that you are using. Because a lot of times I heard from offices, people didn't want a ban. Well, then it became the nuance of what isn't zero and not
right.
putting a number on what isn't zero. So those two things I think are important as we shift our conversation to the thing that's on most people's minds in this industry, which is what happens next for cannabinoid based products.
And Shawn, real quick, I want, before we talk about what happens next and like the downstream impacts and what direction all of these groups are going to go from here, I think it's important too for some of the listeners that aren't as involved as the three of us. Pam, or even Shawn, would one of you mind kind of summarizing what the actual changes in the definition and some of the just high level what those impacts would be, so they can kind of understand and put in context the conversation that we're having?
Yeah, Pam, why don't, because I think the technicality of it is where I think you're going to breathe a lot of life into this. But just to sort of zoom out as far as possible, maybe, if you live in a state, and you mentioned this on the podcast we previously recorded, which was essentially that the public perception is, if cannabis is legal and I can walk into a liquor store and purchase a 5 milligram beverage, it's because weed is legal in my state, or weed is like, I think the public aspect of the consumer facing nature of this is, if you walked into a liquor store in your state, and there are many states across the country where that is a possibility, and you purchased a 5 milligram THC beverage, a seltzer, or whatever sort of the description of the beverage was, that is what we're talking about, is those beverages that sort of entered into a three-tier alcohol system through distribution and through retail. And states have taken a different posture on this. Every state sort of has built their own little structure to it. But those are the things that we're talking about. We are not talking, therefore, about legal marijuana programs where you walk into a dispensary, a medical marijuana patient, or an adult use dispensary. We're not talking about those examples. This is that beverage that was sitting on a otherwise age-gated or sort of legal shelf. That beverage is now, rather than 5 milligrams, rather than 10 milligrams, that's the 0.4 milligrams you were talking about. And that is a change in federal law, not a change in state law. But obviously, a lot of civics lessons going on this weekend too, I should note. I've heard a lot of phrases like what is cloture and all those different things. The one thing I will say is that might be a lasting opportunity for especially the hemp industry to, one, know who your congressperson is, know who your U.S. senators are, develop a relationship and a rapport with them. But to be clear, that federal law does in fact and would in fact supersede state law. But that's all the things. I'll just close this, and I obviously, Pam, by all means, sort of jump in with the specifics that I didn't mention. But taking all of this sort of away is this is the federal law we are talking about. By limiting the opportunity for intoxicating products and sort of redefining to a degree what hemp is and what it is not, I think the takeaway for me is consumers are going to be left sort of either mobilized, educated, informed, but there's choices that they've been making for some time now that through this shutdown resolution, I think the federal government is sort of taking away those choices, taking away that opportunity for them. But again, I would say when we get into the solutions aspect of this, maybe not. Maybe there's an opportunity here to use that consumer base and that educational opportunity and that civics lesson that's occurring here. Because, if we were to redo the I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill, it would probably sound a bit different from a remix standpoint. So, but I mean, Pam, by all means, sort of color in the areas that I didn't get to, but yeah, the federal government is those 5 milligram seltzers in your liquor store. Their days are numbered, perhaps.
Perhaps. And I do think that a remix of When a Bill Becomes a Law is well overdue. So, up next. Yes,
Emergency podcast number 2.
emergency podcast number 2, exactly. I think it's a yes and moment, right? Like this may happen. It doesn't have to necessarily be the reality. But what we do know is that the current state of affairs isn't palatable. And why isn't that palatable? That gets into the details of exactly what is in this package. There are some great actors putting out 5 milligram seltzers, etc., that are testing their final form package, that are using what is called naturally occurring D9, that is making sure their projects are age gated. There is also a significant amount of activity on e-commerce and in smoke shops and other places that aren't necessarily putting out good
That's
age
right.
gating, that are producing these franken cannabinoids like THCP, which can be 33 times stronger, and saying that they get safe harbor under hemp. So really, it's from a consumer standpoint, they just see cannabinoids out there and they think everything is awesome and we've federally legalized and I can purchase these things, at anywhere. I can have them delivered for a while. You could get them on Amazon. That is true. And I think that long term is a good basis for making sure that this exact language doesn't fully come to fruition, because they are an important catalyst in votes and activating voices. But we have to understand how we got here. It's not just about beverage and seltzer. It's about what is in the devil of these details in this language. One, it's about total THC and THCA. the acid form of the molecule, which when you heat becomes delta 9. So there's a lot of farmers who actually have had to destroy entire crops because when you test in the field and you apply total THC, you're not allowed to have high THCA flower. That gets destroyed. But meanwhile, there's sales in e-commerce and at smoke shops of high THCA flower, which is marijuana. So that needed to be addressed. There were
And
the
that's the
synthetic.
0.3, right?
Go
I
ahead.
think
Yeah.
we talked about 0.4. We've talked about, I think to be
Mhm.
clear, the hemp definition is the 0.3 THC. I guess, make sure we are cognizant of our decimal points, but that's the same. It's still 0.3 like not milligrams, Jesus. Um,
0.3%.
that is hemp by legal definition, and that is not changed. What is proposed is at 0.4 per package per product.
Well, the 0.3
Or
is
my
changing a little bit. So it's changing because it now includes THCA in the definition of the base text because crafty lawyers were saying that because it doesn't appear in the definition of hemp in the legislation and was in the promulgated rules by USDA to test in field hemp, that they were breaking a certificate of analysis, rerunning flour after it was cured or dried or potentially inverted from the regulated market. And then they would have high 30% THCA and still
right.
low amounts of Delta 9. Because for those in the audience that don't know, all the flour that you buy on a retail shelf, even in a regulated business, will have high THCA crystals and low Delta 9, which is why they're added together in the field. So that part of the language does change in this context to capture that THCA flower. So you're right, the 0.4 is the downstream products, milligrams. The 0.3, though, now takes into consideration THCA. The other thing that happens in the nuanced language of the bill is they don't allow you to take CBD and convert it into other cannabinoids, and they anchor to what is naturally occurring in the
Mhm.
plant, and you can't take something naturally occurring and then synthesize or manufacture it outside of the plant and find safe harbor. And you can't have cannabinoids that the plant doesn't produce naturally, but that have the same effect of Delta 9 THC, but that are these other like HHCs or
Right.
non tetrahydrocannabinols. So you can see where the concern or the constituents of concern were. If we were just talking, I think, about beverages or even low dose edibles where all it was Delta 9 that was being requested, then I actually do think that there could have been more movement at the federal level. So I think that one of the important realities and the clarity that's happening here is where you focus your asks as you go to the states and you try to figure out what's next. The language is really important. It's 6 pages to replace what was essentially 2 because of that gradation that was happening in the marketplace.
That's right. That sounds
And
right.
that
That's right.
conversion piece, like the CBD, the synthesizing, I mean, I think it's I'd like to see who comes forward and like advocates for, no, I'm a big HHC proponent, right? Like I'm a huge Delta 10 guy. Like that, those people, that I don't see someone like call your congressman to fight for HHC. Like that's just not, so like wrapping our head around, there's some good potential here. There is an opportunity here to demonstrate maturity, to demonstrate seriousness, and getting behind some of these provisions, while also saying, sort of loosen it a little bit for us, loosen it for a consumer market, and create a pathway. And again, our last podcast, a lot of what you said sort of resonated and stuck with me around, like, we don't belong in the farm bill. this is not like, so I think sort of we're getting to that reality abruptly. Like, this is definitely, I'll be the first to admit, good policy doesn't get made with this level of brinksmanship, right? Like this, and if the hemp industry thought that these members of the U.S. Senate were going to fight their fight on their behalf in place of restoring SNAP benefits for constituents in their jurisdictions, their states, or getting air traffic controllers paid and service members paid, and especially you mentioned before Thanksgiving, that again, good policy, probably not the best environment to make it, but here we are, and where do we go? And I think, again, I don't see a lot of advocates for things like Delta 8 or Delta 10. They are science fair projects, and they do not belong on consumer shelves as far as I'm concerned, but I'm no longer a regulator, so that is my opinion, and it carries zero weight. But I guess I just want to flag that there's opportunity in this crisis, and there's still so much dust to settle. And so that's what the future is for. That's what the next year is for.
Look, there's 90 days. So there's the next year. There's
The
also what
FDA,
happens
yeah.
in 90 days from here now. The FDA is going to come up with a list of what they believe are naturally occurring cannabinoids, what they believe are, let me get the exact language because I want to make sure that I'm being judicious
I
and
picture
wise with,
like a
but
highlighter,
like
like
in the next
those.
90 days, from the enactment of this act, the FDA will list all cannabinoids known to be of naturally capable of producing the cannabis sativa L plant, right? So they're going to do that. Well, I guess it's 90
Cool.
days
We can do
after the
that.
1 year, but like FDA is definitely going to be starting this project immediately if they have not already done so. And we'll link to the Griffith bill, where if you go and you look at Representative Griffith's bill, they've already done a lot of this work. So if they're going to be able to do that in 90 days from a year from now, that conversation is starting now. It's starting now at the states. It's starting now with get your ducks in the row and your science to support what it is that you're saying, what is capable of being naturally produced. A list of the tetrahydrocannabinol classes known to be naturally occurring. So that's D8, naturally occurs in the plant. And then a list of any other cannabinoid with similar effects to Delta 9. So that tells you exactly what this agency is going to be looking at and has been thinking about. And I would like to wager that I would like them to say what is in usable quantities in the plant. I like Delta 8. I suffer from migraines. Delta 8 doesn't give you a head high. It relaxes your body. And for some people that are in acute and chronic pain, Delta 8 is actually a way better cannabinoid for them to be utilizing. But it has to be made safely because it does require an acid catalyst to force a conversion because the plant produces it, but not necessarily in commercially viable quantities, but in usable quantities. And that is something we can borrow from DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Educational Act from 1994. They use that usable quantity benchmark, and that's something the FDA is familiar with. The fact that hemp had all of this time, the last 5 years, to put together a new dietary ingredient application for CBC or CBG, anything other than THC or CBD, which are drug excluded. We could have done a self-affirming grass. Now, would FDA have called you out on it? Yes, but that would engage in those conversations. So I think it's also important to recognize how important the FDA is going to be here. These products that are currently in the liquor stores violate the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. Nothing of what just happened in this bill or in 2018 alleviated that fact. So they were always living, arguably, on borrowed time. And if a consumer said, this says it's federally legal, I consumed it and I have a problem, they have an FTC claim, right? Fraud on the consumer, because it's not FDA, it's not FDCA compliant. It's not a new dietary ingredient. So that again goes to the Griffiths bill, which looks to revise the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act and actually give these products certainty. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done by the industry, both cannabis and hemp, in order to prepare for what comes next. Using the word prepare, there's also the David Joyce companion bills, the States Act, and prepare. Maybe
Mhm.
those get galvanized much faster. And Shawn, to your earlier point of making sure consumers get access, let's start talking about more ubiquitous access under these cannabis programs. If they're the ones that are going to have to service the consumer in the interim, how are these states going to grapple with this looming axe over them of 365 days? Now, Farm Bill may happen, I am hearing. We'll see draft language by the December possibly, and passage of a skinny Farm Bill in early 2026 Q1. If the Farm Bill passes with some of this language in it, I'm wondering what that does to the time frame. I
Right.
wonder what kind of opportunities there are. I look at the fact that we have an interstate commerce opportunity to look at what was done between California, Washington, and Oregon, looking to want to work
Mhm.
together. Is there some opportunity for the states that have leaned in to this hemp opportunity for them to look for baseline standards so they can continue to transact, so that that can inform what happens in Congress? Because there can be bills that supersede this language, right? So I think this year becomes really important. It's not a year of lawsuits. It shouldn't be a year of being petty and saying, I don't like what you've done. It should be a year of realignment and seeking to provide a framing that can replace this. And there are pieces of legislation that are already there, but the states are going to be integral. And I think if you look at the 39 AGs,
Right.
whole memo was a thing, right? This language can stand. What if there was some semblance of a call memo for hemp products or low dose THC products that meet a certain spec that could be out in market? So we really start to use this as a catalyst. You talked about on the last podcast that slingshot heard around the world. I don't care that it's 0.4 milligrams of total THC. 0.4 milligrams of anything on the schedule that now Congress is saying should be out in open commerce means that you either are undermining the entire ethos of the schedule, because I don't think that you would put 4 milligrams of opioids in, what do they call them? Topicals, inhalables, or edibles products. I don't think that that's something that Congress would be supportive of. So what does that mean in the rescheduling conversation? What does that mean for getting stuff off of the CSA? What does it mean for THC? These are I'd love to know your guys' thoughts. These are the real interesting, I think, moments that follow the initial, what's happening?
I mean, those are the questions that I have, and we touched on them a little bit, or Pam, you've touched on them a little bit too. Like, this is going to happen. The U.S. government is going to reopen. This language is going to be on the books. The clock will start ticking once the president signs this into law. If you are the one that's being like, well, in some way, shape, or form, everybody's being affected by it, and you pointed out some in a good way, some in a bad way. But if I'm one of those producers of that beverage that's sitting on that gas station shelf, and let's even just say in this scenario that I'm the responsible business owner that tries to do everything right, I'm going to be impacted. Well, like, they need to come together. There needs to be one or two voices that speak for this group. But what I'm interested to hear from you, because it's so complex, like it's such a complicated chessboard right now when you're talking about like the Farm Bill and the definition, how it's being now defined, the overlay with what's happening at the FDA. Like, if we're the planning committee and we're trying to figure out, all right, we've learned our lesson. We need some regulations here. We need to start acting like the adults in the room and have like some serious proposals in order to make sure that we don't go off the edge here. Like what are the first like top 1, 2, maybe 3 things or areas that we should be focused on to have hopefully a chance in 365 days to not upend this entire marketplace?
First and foremost, I would say what it is that you are proud of the government for doing. You get more flies with honey than you do
So true.
vinegar. What
So
did you
true.
do? Thank you, government, for recognizing that there are some bad actors who are putting out synthetic products into the marketplace. Thank you, government, for recognizing that there's a parsing out between industrial hemp and this new cannabinoid bucket. But we've maybe overshot the goal. And we have consumers in all of these states. And Shawn, to your point, know who your congressional contingent is and start educating them. Yes,
Yeah.
there were good things here, but we overshot the target. And we don't want to create a secondary illicit market because we're already competing with it when we did cannabis. So I think that coming to the table with a certain amount of humility and, hey, I understand why this was done, but we overcorrected. So what can we do to ensure that those things that were done with intended purpose that address the constituents of concern that were public health and safety issues? Now let's get to the consumer. Let's make sure that that consumer has a place to go, that we have this HHS announcement that says that cannabis doesn't belong on the schedule. I think it's building those bridges to put that forward. And that would be the first thing that I would do. I wouldn't start name calling or saying these people are prohibitionists or like they just don't understand the market or there's the loss of all of these jobs. Understand that your industry is judged by your weakest link and they've given you an opportunity to set a floor of acceptability. Now is your job to go in and raise that bar so that you can continue to serve those industries. So I think that's a big lesson learned there, hopefully. And
I
then
think it's
find.
helpful.
Oh, Shawn,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead. Finish up. No, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt you.
we'll start there.
Unpacking sort of the politics of the weekend, especially sort of this all came together late last week, as far as like the reality that they had to confront. But I think you mentioned something like the weakest link. I think there's some vital partnerships that are possible here that I think also need to be latched onto or going in together as a cohesive ecosystem. I think is also really the opportunity that could be presenting itself, because the letter campaigns like the 39 AGs and then some AGs were trying to walk it back saying, I just want to make sure we preserve our program, but not some other states. And so now there's confusion swirling there. And then it was the alcohol industry is on our side. And well, not entirely. Some might be, some aren't. And then you saw Coca-Cola get involved and Nestle. And so now I'm watching that, sort of observing that, thinking this is bigger than any one hemp beverage brand. This is bigger than any one U.S. senator's constituent. And also, as I'm seeing this happen, I'm thinking there's blood in the water and folks are starting to swirl around it. But I think coming out of this, you know where people are. So you know who your opponents are and you know who your allies are. So get in the room, start talking to them, hatch a plan. But when we talk about the alcohol industries for us, in writing, they're not. In writing, they've advocated to Congress that they are not for you per se. Some of the bigger consumer brands are not for you, or at least expressing. Because I think one thing that, and you referenced this in your earlier comment, it wasn't as if the AG said ban it; they said regulate it. It wasn't as if some of these other companies that are coming out, they're not saying ban these things; they're saying regulate them. And I think that's the thing to latch onto, is to say, we will take you at that offer and let's sit down and hash out what a regulatory scheme looks like and should look like. And that's where I think showing that you too are a responsible operator and want to weed out those bad actors allows you to create allies. And obviously, having been, and Erik, I'm sure you can speak to it too, having been in a circumstance where you have these competing interests coming to you saying, solve our problem, solve our conflict, it's easier to do when they come in together and say, we heard you, we got your message. We would like to come together and propose the following structure. And we are all in agreement, knowing that any agreement will be fragile, will be delicate. I think there's a lot of value in when that dust does in fact settle, of sort of regrouping and saying, here's the cascade of letters that flooded Congress over the past 48 to 72 hours. We now know where everybody is. Let's look at that map and say, ally, 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 opportunity, opponent. And we know, again, we know what every member of Congress is hearing. We know who they're going to hear from. Let's get to work.
And look at that. That's that salient plumb line, right? So first, don't make them an enemy. Say, I understand that you had to address these certain things and know that you're going to have to give to get. That, I think, is one of the biggest weak points if hemp does a postmortem and looks back at this, was not giving anything up, right? Not understanding that THCA is an issue, not siphoning off synthetics and being really supportive of that. Like, deal with that. And then, Shawn, to your point, where were people having alignment? It was around regulation. It was around knowing that these products are out there. So create those opportunities to show cohesion or find that familiarity and bring that to the forefront and lead with that. What is the purpose and the objective that you want to get to? And start reassessing the relationships at the state level. I think that the litigations are going to be impacted by what is happening federally. I think the states are going to be, and Erik, you mentioned this, much more important and emboldened to act in this interim period because they see the direction. They finally understand that Congress isn't looking at hemp as one vanilla thing. They're looking at it as a multiple or a variegated industry. And I think we're going to have a really unique opportunity in the Farm Bill. Everybody's state plans are going to have to shift a little bit because now we understand what industrial hemp is versus growing hemp, and what does that mean, and how do you have the seed stock or biomass stock? I think we haven't addressed work in progress hemp extract yet. That's huge. You want to say you want to invest in a domestic hemp supply, that CBD is important. Great. You're going to have a bunch of THC left over from all of these big CBD grows if we're investing in CBD. So actually, it makes more sense for the states to start developing standards and programs so that THC can either go into a marijuana program, or we can start to hopefully see in that year, maybe we see states transacting with each other while they still can in a meaningful way. And that may drive different legislative outcomes at the federal level. So if we don't waste the next 3 to 6 months post enactment just mudslinging and blaming each other for how we got to here, I think every single one of these days, including before this is signed, I think it's a foregone conclusion. But in this environment, that would be skeptical to do. Right? Every day from this day forward, as to how you're going to meaningfully use that time period to not see this iteration of legislation come to full fruition, is critically important. We are in continuous improvement territory. Legislation is not written in stone. If that's the one takeaway you take away from this podcast, if what we are saying is upsetting to you or what I am saying, take away the fact that it is not set in stone. That you learn today. So
I
just
think
happening. Go ahead.
an important point there too is Mitch McConnell was never shy about his intention to do this. So nobody should be surprised that Mitch McConnell is coming for intoxicating hemp. So like that battle line was drawn a while ago. Now, could you perhaps say I was a little caught flat-footed that it got folded into the shutdown talks? Sure, maybe. But this was an issue in July when Rand Paul successfully stripped it from the legislation. So I think this has been a sort of a hot potato for long enough that nobody should be surprised that there was going to be some maneuvering and some shenanigans even. And so I think that's where, as I sort of reflect on this, and just to sort of landscape it even a bit more, the House has not yet voted on it, but they have essentially an up or down vote on the Senate package, and they can consider it or not. Again, the choice is reopen the government or fight for hemp. Sorry, hemp, but like that choice is, while binary, it's certainly it may not be a difficult one for a lot of members. And then President Trump, at least through the administration, through a White House spokesperson, said that he does in fact support the provisions in there. So as much as it's not a foregone conclusion, and anything that DC is considering is certainly subject to change at a moment's notice, all signs are pointing to this becoming the law of the land at some point relatively soon. And then the work, to your point, sort of continues from there. But I just think it's important to say, like, this wasn't a surprise move by Mitch McConnell. And also, the man has spent decades leading the Republican caucus of the U.S. Senate. I'm not surprised that he was able to cash in maybe a few leftover favors to get this thing done. So, and then also let's sort of pack that out and Rand Paul has not spent those decades currying favor amongst the members. So just sort of the politics being what they are. I think it's just important to note that it's not law yet, but it seems as though it's, if I were to place a bet, I would certainly bet that it does become law. But maybe, Erik, we should talk about like what do states do? Because I think that is sort of the cascade of this. It's going to impact. You have a lot of states that have built programs and built expectations and revenue and all these things and put some real bureaucracy behind these things. But I think they're probably scratching their heads wondering, oh shit, what do I do now? So,
yeah, I mean, that's where my head went when this news first broke. As a former state regular, working with states that have separate hemp programs, is like, what is the impact on their programs and everything that they're doing? And it was interesting at the top of the call, and even during the conversation with Pam, she brought up the idea of a Cole-style memo. Like, that would be incredibly helpful for the planning and the work that they're doing. You're going from this interstate to intrastate model. What does that mean for the regulations that the state has to build around these if they want to keep those programs going? I mean, there's so much gray area here where I would assume that administrations and elected officials will be strongly advocating for some clarity here. It's just, what does that clarity look like moving forward? It could manifest itself in a number of different ways. But yeah, I mean, you have these up and running programs that I can't imagine that they would just kind of close the book on them. They would just look a lot different and be coming from a different place.
You've got Minnesota, you've got Tennessee, you've got
Texas.
Texas is Ohio is debating live and like plans before Thanksgiving. We're going to have a
North Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah. And like Tennessee's program goes into effect January 1st. And like so these states are probably like, again, like, well, shit, like we just exerted effort on putting in place some structure here. And also, again, we're anticipating some revenue out of this. And now what? And in fairness, I would be like, I would probably ask my federal congressional delegation, like, what do I do here? But
yeah,
that's a perfect example of that the civics lesson here is, if you have a good rapport with your state where you operate in and are having a successful program, leverage that to then go and say, use your congressional delegation, say, what do you propose that we do here? And what can you sort of help us walk through? Can you facilitate a conversation with FDA around some of the cannabinoid questions? Can you facilitate a conversation with, are there state compacts that are possible here to sort of deal with some of the residual issues that are going to just appear and have to be dealt with? So, but I guess I wonder, Pam, from your standpoint, if you are a state, I don't even know where some of this stuff falls regulatory wise. If you were to be a state, which state would you be? I guess what's your first move as a state, whether it be a governor or, or perhaps, the cannabis regulator that maybe oversees a fledgling hemp program? I'm really curious. I can see it through that lens, but I don't know what my first move would be, to be honest.
I think it's a evaluation of what your program is and how hemp is integrated to your program. And then I would convene the regulator, somebody from the office of the general counsel from the governor's office or the AG, and say,
The
how is it
lawyers are
that
coming. Oh man,
That's the
how
worst.
is
I
it
would
that
have been
goes
we
the
like,
fun.
nope, not doing it.
Yeah.
well, but you want to be buttress,
Don't
right? You want
do
to
it.
give somebody else the responsibility. They should be giving memos on what it is that you are going to have to do. How does this impact your state's CSA? Some people pulled hemp out of their state CSA. Arizona did not, like Pennsylvania did not. What does that mean for your program? And holding stakeholder meetings, what does it mean? I think that this year is so important. Some people in Congress fought for 6 months. Some people wanted it to be immediate. I think that the year is really important because a lot can happen in a year if, to both of your points, people start to have these conversations. And a state is going to have to figure that out. A state like Tennessee, who just got sued because they had to allow THCA until their new program came, they may want to revise that, given that they know
That's
that
right.
that isn't actually what Congress intended. I think I saw a blog today mentioned to me by somebody in the hemp industry that said they don't think the fight is over yet. Let's continue to try to stop something. I don't waste the time. It's either this
Yeah.
or it's something potentially worse. And I think that that is something that is important to be said on this podcast. If this piece of legislation doesn't move, I promise you, those companies, Nestle, Unilever, alcohol that doesn't stand completely with you, the AGs, they are not going to go quietly into the night. You may get something worse than this. I don't think that this is the bottom of saying we want no cannabinoids in this system of hemp.
That's such an
So,
interesting point. I didn't even thought about that.
It can
this
always get
isn't-
worse, Eric. It can always get worse.
can always
Always.
It can always get worse, but this, you have time and you have the ability to galvanize the consumer. You have the ability to go to states and say, look, your hemp program was more accessible. Why do you think that it gave traction? Let's talk about how we can improve our our cannabinoid program, our regulated marijuana program to be more accessible. Start to push that call memo to be for cannabinoids so states can just start transacting with cannabinoids. Forcing the hand of the government to act more quickly with rescheduling or descheduling. These are things that the states, I think, really need to talk about. And it's a great thing for Canada to talk about. It's a great thing
Yeah.
to start leaning on each other for what it is that they're going to have to do, because they're all going to be grappling with these same issues. The ag departments are going to be getting involved because these state plans are going to have to change. What does that look like? So it really is, first and foremost, understanding where your state sits. Very different between California and a state like Tennessee as to what this
Exactly.
means for them. And to start then reaching out to states that are in your same bucket. I have 2 robust programs that live in the same state. Somewhere like Minnesota and Colorado probably are more well seated to talk to each other about how to move forward than California and Tennessee. So I think it's sort of that mentality. And then as a
And I
business, or go ahead. Let's stay with
just
states.
thinking about that timeline a bit more too is you do have time, but don't take it for granted and use it
Mhm.
wisely. Meaning to run the calendar out, and sure, let's say it's a year from, I don't know, Thanksgiving. You're running into midterm election season. So you're really looking at 6 to 9 months, probably closer to 6. But I would also say Congress is good at extending things or delaying things, but they will do it based on things like good faith. So if you just like, and Pam, you mentioned, if you start tweeting at them and you start LinkedIn tagging them and you start running commercials, and like, if you start sending your consumer base their way, or you just do nothing and say, I've got a year to maximize revenue and get the hell out of the industry, then that deadline is in fact a deadline. But if you are actively negotiating a legislative package and you're headed sort of face first into, like, you need a few more months to either, or a few more weeks to wrap it up, then I think you could see Congress passes CRs constantly and stuff gets tucked into them constantly. And so I would just, I guess, don't take time for granted, use it to your advantage, and use it in a way to build good faith and a good rapport, because that's how things, dates get changed a lot. That point 4 can get changed. Like, it's easier to tweak than it is to overhaul. But if you want to go for overhaul, that's going to take a lot of effort. That's going to take a lot of coordination. It's going to take a lot of collaboration. But I would just sort of reiterate that it's not, it might be a year, it might be 365 days, but you're also running into the legislative calendar and the political calendar. And those things tend to override the ability to get meaningful policy done. So I just want to caution that timeline a bit too.
I mean, you bring up an interesting point with the midterm elections. I mean,
Yeah.
and the other point, Shawn, that I really latched on to, and I think you hit the nail on the head with it, is like the coalition building. I'm sure the industry to a certain extent has done some coalition building, but you need that larger group speaking with one voice. You need to find consensus on all of these sticky issues. And I think there needs to be a come to Jesus moment where you start folding on some of these things that you maybe felt were important for the greater good. Um, but just having that experience of working in state legislatures and just understanding how to be effective, I think is a really important and I'm not that intimately involved with the hemp ecosystem. And maybe there are these groups that already do exist that can corral these groups, speak with one voice and get that consensus. But I just thought that was an excellent point. But the challenging of the calendar, I feel like this work needed to start like yesterday.
Oh, it should be starting today, and it should be looking for your champions, and strange bedfellows make the best
Yeah.
policy
Yeah.
federally.
It's
You need to
the
find
politics here are
people.
so interesting.
Yeah.
Griffith, look, who would have thought he's putting out a CBD bill that really could be the archetype for full-scale legalization? All you have to do is ratchet up those allowances, right? It, he is in the House. He's going to need a Senate support. I think also understanding that you need to find champions who are connectors versus people who are polarizing. Understanding who is going to champion your issue is really important. Sort of start to bespoke it. If you start to give people wins and say, I understand why you did this, let's navigate through that, you may be able to find people who didn't love this language but didn't see an alternative. So really doing the work, putting together the dossiers and the safety studies, going and making sure that you're having these pre-submission meetings with FDA, what's going to happen, how you alleviate that Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. All of those things are really important, and it is midterms. Could this be an
Mhm.
issue that drives people to the polls? Is it an issue that somebody in your state that could run for Congress is going to want to talk about? Could Gavin Newsom be on the docket potentially running for president? Who are going to be the next governors in some of these key market states? Have them understand this issue and what it means authentically to the state, right? That is now what we need to talk about. Is these are THC products, they are cannabinoid products. Consumers want them, and they deserve them to be safe, and they deserve them to be accessible. And they
And
don't
that's
deserve to be called
This
Farm Bill compliant.
I'll say this talk of building a champions list and chalking up wins and pulling together supporting materials and it's making me really want like a giant whiteboard right now. Like just that's me and my elements. Like there's no
Totally.
better time than when you get a group going, you get the juices flowing and you start building a good old champions list.
But
It's a
I mentioned the
champions list.
politics of
It's
this
an
earlier too.
education list. What is
Yeah.
It
natural D9? What are the benefits of natural D9? What are some of these studies that we want to see done, right? In metastatic breast cancer, CBD builds bone. THC alleviates the drug opioid addiction, which is something that this country wants to invest in. Make America healthy again. These are natural ingredients that come from a plant. There's so much good here if we start talking about the positives instead of trying to snake through a loophole, right? Like, I think that's the real turning point of what this language should do.
I think we're kind of rounding out the corner here that this maneuver, this news is a bit of a reckoning. But I think in that reckoning is that opportunity to reassess, to re-engage. And I would say to the last point you made, as far as the good that can be shared, that has been discovered, is know your audience when presenting that information, because simply saying consumers are choosing these and it's great for the economy, that's not going to resonate with someone who's saying that's gas station weed on shelves that's being sold to kids. And they can then hold up a bag of gummies that are 500 milligrams and say, consumers want these or kids want these. And so I think the takeaway is talking about how people, a certain generation is choosing these because, as again, you, by saying this is an alcohol alternative, you just pissed off alcohol. So that's where I think the talking point, the like, know who you're meeting with, know what their priorities are, speak to that, let it resonate. But also, you also flagged the issue of, I got your message, I heard you. Here's what I am proposing. I also brought in researchers, or I brought in an ally in the substance use community that shows this has been found to be helpful for avoiding or weaning off of opioids, or just as a pure alternative, as an outright alternative. And so I think the opportunity presented is to really frame this. And this is the testament, or I think the positive takeaway, that hemp should, as you don't sleep at night, I'm sure many operators are not, is you have those positives to pluck out. You can frame this as a positive to a variety of constituencies, so you have that advantage. You're not trying to, like, you're not making it up. You're not manufacturing data. You have information. You have these studies. You have this data. You just need to package it properly to persuade your audience. And your audience right now, though, are lawmakers and policymakers. And so I think you're not trying to sell products on Instagram right now. You are trying to survive. You are trying to essentially get out from this restrictive language. But I think, Pam, to your point, though, it is not a ban. And therefore you are not starting at a ban. There is a very, very small dose, but a dose of permission here. And so that alone there's oxygen there. And I think it's life-giving. I think there's an opportunity at the end of that year calendar. There is a lifeline. But I also understand the emotion of, this sucks. This was definitely that reckoning sucks for them.
And it really sucks because you know what else we lost? The veterans lost their access to medical marijuana because
That's
all
right.
of the oxygen in the room was on this topic.
That's a
Instead
great
of
point.
showing up to ensure that veterans have access to THC that doesn't impact their veterans benefits, like I don't want to end without that acknowledgement. Yes, they lost access to hemp, but they also lost the overt access that they so sorely need, because they still, if they tested positive for THC, could be in that situation without that language, which was lost in the chaos because I think most of the conversation was around this. So that is an important catalyst in a group of stakeholders that moves needles really far. It was in the package all the way until these final moments. So those are people that we should be targeting as potential champions now that we're trying to have this more united approach about Americans gaining access to products that contain cannabinoids that they want. And so we shouldn't be allowing the oxygen in the room to continue to be the infighting about what should be done or stripped or striked or whatever with this legislation. What can we do to improve it? Because hemp has said it many a times. I've been on panels. I did a closed door panel I with the ag committee, and the representative there said, we want to be regulated. Great. Then let's do the work of how to be regulated. And that means putting numbers on things. That means regulating some of these harder constituents, which guess what? You don't have to do now. Now you just get to talk about the refinement and the improvement and what we do next. I actually think it's a gift to not have to deal internally, because I understand we all work in cannabis. There's fractures within any industry. What this has done has given you a floor. Now that floor is about, 7 stories higher than it needs to be. So you just need to chip away at it, but at least you don't have to have a lot of those conversations anymore. And I think that will allow the more sophisticated conversations to happen. It'll allow the benefit of these products to come to the forefront because you're taking off the bottom rung. So
Yeah, I think
hopefully
that's
there's lots of opportunity, but I think it's important to recognize that marijuana lost in this spending package too.
I think that's where I was going to go next, and sort of try to bring that industry, that element into this conversation too, because there also has been some family jealousy and rivalry between the two of why do they get it so easy when I'm age gated, man trapped, frosted windows, vaulted, tracked, taxed, and they're readily available. That sucks. And I think that dynamic has created a good deal of tension. You've also seen people try to hug that line or sort of walk that fence of I'm in both worlds, especially some of the larger MSOs around the country. But is there a reconciling there at some point where they can get together, they can coordinate and say, this is what the future of intoxicants should be. This is what the future of the molecule should be, regardless of its legal definition, and therefore, or name. And I wonder, like, is there a grand bargain opportunity here for just a nationwide, thoughtful, cohesive policy, be it marijuana, hemp, veterans, medical, adult use? Like, there's so many different buckets you can pluck from, but I'm just thinking out loud about the opportunity to bring everybody under the one big tent.
It's totally there. I mean, look, this is American consumers don't understand the difference. That was the whole, I think, big problem here is they just want cannabinoids, and this is the grand opportunity to go back and ask and push the AGs, push the states. You want to have interstate commerce? Great, so do we. We want to start low and slow. Let's go. You want to force the issue? Now is the time, right? Congress just did you a solid. Now, mind you, that solid wasn't 1 milligram or 2.5, which would have been better. It was 0.4. But again, it's not zero. And that means that you have to have a basis of safety. You have to feel comfortable enough to allow that into commerce. That's a huge platform to start from. And you've got a handful of states, over a dozen, that really do have good regulated hemp programs. Those are, by very definition, cannabinoid programs. So everybody is suffering. That is the one common denominator. If you operate in the THC or the cannabinoid sphere, you are going through a hardship. You are all pioneers You want to settler the new frontier? Then the new frontier has to be the cannabinoid frontier. And let me tell you, you all have baggage. You all are worried about putting food on the table. You all want to have business. Now is the time to use that competition as healthy competition. You want to create a market? If Pabst beer gave up during Prohibition, they wouldn't be Pabst today. Do you want to know what they did? They made Pabst S cheese, which is a pasteurized cheese. Then they violated Kraft's cheese IP, right? And then they sued each other and they settled out, and then that became Velveeta. Like, there are opportunities when you are given
And they're
hardship.
opposed to the loophole.
Right. Why?
it-
Because they want standardization and clarity. That's what these companies want. Alcohol, the brands, the manufacturers, they don't not want it. They want it in a way that is stable and that they can leverage. So does Coca-Cola and Nestle. Trust me, you're just a widget. You're another thing to sell. You taking a step back, understand who gave you the opportunity initially. It were people that could divest themselves of liability. That's really where you're seeing the division in who was submitting letters to Congress. Distributors and retailers were shelved. When they take on product, they sever liability. Who do you sue when a product harms you? First, you're going to sue the manufacturer of that product and the brand. You're not really going to sue the retailer because the retailer's just selling something that they believe is allowed, right? You're not really going to sue the distributor. So now is the time to go to those anchor industries, the manufacturers and the brands, and understand why they didn't like this program. Because I'm going to tell you, it's not because they don't want to make money. So bringing them into the fold and having that conversation is going to allow you to understand how to bring forth regulation that's going to benefit everybody, and including what business you want to be in. It's going to help you de-risk your liability. It's going to help build a brand. And I believe that these companies have stickiness with the consumer, and the consumers gonna want to get safe product. So these next few months, this next 6 months is going to be really, really critical. And I hope that people take the time that they need to have the emotions about what's happening. I don't want to pretend like it's not emotional or it's not upsetting and that you can't do business as usual and that it just hits you like a wall in the face. But know that other people have been here before. Cannabis businesses are constantly here. Learn from each other, support one another, and go. Shawn, you and Erik are there. You can help, be consultants. You know what regulators go through. Go and reach out and tap your networks. Your regulators are going to be in the same situation you are. They don't know what to do. This is a huge fundamental change, and it needs stakeholders, and it needs people showing up with information and ideas. And how do we navigate these uncharted waters? I think there's a lot of opportunity, but if all Congress hears is bitching and complaining and blaming and you're costing us jobs and this and that, instead of the opportunities to create more jobs and bring more people under the tent, they're going to shut the door and say, we handled the immediate problem. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And
Because there's another problem right behind it. There's another problem right behind it. And I would, on your point, as far as the consumer brands, the Coca-Colas and Nestle's, et cetera, even the alcohol manufacturers, there was an invitation in their letters, which was they want regulations. Take that invitation, right? Like, that's, to me, the takeaway is, you said you wanted regulation. We want to take you up on that offer.
That sounds right. My takeaway from this conversation is, even though we're in this interesting place, I'll just call it interesting.
Emergency podcast.
Yeah, the fact that we've had to pull the trigger on an emergency podcast to address this issue, the sense of optimism that I've had in this conversation over the last 60 minutes, is not what I expected. There are opportunities there. There are smart people in the room. There are pathways to get to an ends it would work for the vast majority of stakeholders here. Did not know that we would learn the history of Velveeta cheese, but it's definitely been worth the emergency podcast.
Just for that
Dude,
factoid alone, yeah.
I want you to know one of my favorite shows is The Foods That America Built. It's on the History Channel. It's like if drunk history kind of met the history of food, because they do these dramatizations that are very funny. But it is incredible. Like, the father of the FDA is the son of Henry Heinz, because he didn't like that everybody was making claims. And he put Heinz 57 in a clear glass bottle to distinguish it from all of the other condiments, and that it was safe. And then all of a sudden, people were putting unsafe things in clear glass bottles to try to attract that consumer. And I love his shrewd business sense. He sunk a ship off of the coast in Pittsburgh with all the clear glass bottles within like some mile radius, so nobody else could use them. But like, he went and lobbied Congress. His son was a lawyer and said, I need something that regulates how you make claims. And that was the birth of the FDA. So everybody watch The Foods That America Built. You will get vastly amazing ideas about your companies and what other companies have gone through. But everybody faces regulatory headwinds, and they make hay out of it. So I invite you to make hay out of this regulatory headwind, and don't accept this as the final offer. It's just the final offer for right now. And if the Farm Bill has taught you anything, it was supposed to be a 5-year piece of legislation. It is now, I think, working on year 8. So
Yeah, there you go.
don't worry, this is not the end. It's the end of the beginning of something new. So I hope that there's some positivity at the end of the line.
Go get him, team.
Yeah,
Go get 'em.
now I'm like, do I actually have to watch these shows now?
Yeah.
Or do I just send recommendations to Pam because you need to spruce up your intake, your television intake? But is that ship still available? Can I dive and see the bottles? I have a lot of questions, but this has been incredibly insightful and, not surprisingly, incredibly informative. And I would just look, I think we did this for a reason, which was news broke and we wanted to talk about it. Erik and I were chatting about it. We wanted to talk to Pam about it, get her take. But we also realized that if we can shed some light on our take on the world, and maybe it might inform what some of it. Look, the audience that we're trying to talk to here is those folks that are interested in cannabis and cannabis policy, those folks that are in this space. And if you took anything from this conversation, it's that it's not a great day to be a hemp operator, but there is a future. There is a path. There are multiple paths, and all of them are available to you over the next year. And again, I think the civics lesson out of this is that sometimes laws and policy get made under the less ideal circumstances of you or a government shutdown. And that's where you find yourself. That is your reality. Where we go next is ultimately up to you and your colleagues and your peers in this space. And it's better to be informed about what your options are than to just sit and stare at a blank whiteboard. And so I think, Erik, to your point, that's the next phase of this, is to game it out and figure out what your next move is. And it sounds like it's on multiple fronts. And that's all of that, to me, is an opportunity. So the takeaway being, the government shutdown is almost over, and it's going to claim potentially some victims in it. But that final story in that chapter is not yet written, and you will have a lot to say about it. So, Erik, any closing thoughts before we close our first emergency podcast?
No, I mean, I think that you took us out pretty good there. Very nicely said. Just thank you, Pam, for joining us again. Always fun. Look forward to emergency podcast number 2, whatever that may be.
Let's stop meeting like this. Yeah, we should probably, have some lighthearted. We don't have any trivia today either, because again, emergency podcast. Well, look, again, thank you everybody for listening. As always, we do have some regularly scheduled programming coming your way soon enough, but Hopefully you found this to be informative and insightful to you. So as always, link, subscribe, do all the things that people do for podcasts. Pam, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for shedding a lot more light than Erik and I could have ever come up with. Always great to see you. Always great to have you on board. And we look forward to having you back again. We will find another topic that is not an emergency, but we'll also check in with you because I think there's going to be a lot of moving pieces to this. This story is not yet finished, and there'll be a lot of ebbs and flows as it evolves over the next year or so. So until then, to everybody, happy Thanksgiving if we don't come to you with another episode before then. And just, keep on trucking. I don't know what else to say.
The hybrid. The hybrid.